The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
If first impressions are important, then Pope Francis I appears to be humble and graced with the common touch. We talk about the new Pope and the difficult issues facing the Catholic Church with Catholic activist Catherine Wolff. The game is religion and faith. The game is on. Simon, welcome to the game. We are happy to welcome back our resident expert on the Catholic Church, Catherine Wolff, editor of Not Less Than Everything, Catholic Writers on Heroes of Conscience from Joan of Arc to Oscar Romero, an anthology of essays on Catholicism, faith, and heroism, and a longtime leader in the Catholic communities of Stanford and Santa Clara University. Thanks for coming back. Great time to be talking about this stuff. Let's talk about Pope Francis, which you were telling me off the air, we don't call him the first. I guess that sounds a little pretentious. But this is a Pope who clearly is not interested in being pretentious. He's interested in sort of elevating humility, if that's not a contradiction in terms.
You know, the first time he walked out on that little balcony and you've got hundreds of thousands of people in the square and millions watching on television, and, you know, he's dressed really simply and he doesn't immediately bless or address people. He asks them to pray for him, and he asks for their blessing on him before he gives. That was the most powerful sort of gesture that I have seen in years, and really broke with tradition. That's usually a very triumphal moment where the Pope is sort of elevated above all, and he very much pulled back from that.
It's always struck, I was saying about this, you know, you go to the conclave and you don't go back home. It's like they make you Pope, you're there. Whatever stuff you left home, someone has to go get it for you.
Indeed.
So there must also be sort of an almost dizzying sort of chain of events.
Yes.
But it sounds like that you think, and I suspect a lot of other Catholics think, that this humbleness that he conveys, this we serve the poor, we are, is very important at this time in this moment of the church.
Yes, it is, and I think it's taken some by surprise. You know, going into the conclave, inevitably there were sort of political factions and people had certain reforms that they were interested in. And what do we get? We don't get somebody who's part of this faction or that faction or argues for this or that. We get somebody who we don't really know a lot of his views on some of the hot button issues, but he immediately comes out for simplicity, for love of the poor, for a kind of personal humility, and sort of plays that out in his own life when he was a bishop down in Buenos Aires, and in his actions so far as Pope, calling himself very much the Bishop of Rome, you know, and inviting that local flock to him. Interestingly enough, already, I think, setting a tone in the Vatican. I read a really funny little interview with one of the Vatican watchers who said that now when he's interviewing some of his contacts, his cardinal contacts, they're all dressing much more simply.
Yeah, well, and
much more simply.
Apparently, he even thought about not using the traditional quarters that the Pope has because they're particularly.
Oh, he's not living there. No, he's living in the guest house. I think they put him in another little suite though, so he could have another room to visit, to have people come and visit him.
Yeah. He's from Argentina. He's from the Western Hemisphere. He's from Latin America.
First Pope.
I read while they were around that time. There are more Catholics in Brazil than there are in Spain, Germany, and Italy combined. 40%
of Catholics live in Central and South America.
Yeah, so that must be significant as well.
It is significant, and I think it comes at a turning point for the Church in Latin America, because really the attrition is kind of devastating. I mean, I read something that 20% of Brazilians in the last 15 years have left the church. That's devastating, and you see similar numbers otherwise. And, you know, it comes out of the complicated history of the church on the one hand, the hierarchy being allied with what we would see as really rather reactionary, repressive governments, and then more of the lower clergy taking the side of the poor, and you have the whole development of liberation theology around that. So you have a kind of divided church that way anyway. And then you just have the changes in the culture that are happening in the 21st century all over the globe. So there's a lot to deal with in the church in South America.
Let's talk about the College of Cardinals, also known as the Conclave. The only real controversy that you could see heading up to it is who was going to participate, because there were some cardinals people thought should not be there because of scandal in their service.
Well, there are 120, I think, all told, or that's the limit. And I think you can't vote if you're over 80. Yeah. So there were 117. One got ill. A cardinal from Scotland had to resign because some long-term issues of his own in terms of abuse of priests surfaced. And so there turned out to be 115 of them.
What do we know about how that process works? Did we learn anything new that we didn't know before because of this particular vote?
Well, I thought it was kind of intriguing. There was a whole series of meetings before, which they call the General Congregation, and they kind of hash out what the issues are, and they have a little give and take, although apparently it's pretty stiff, like everybody just gets up and gives a speech, and then the next person gives a speech. But after that's done, then they go into this secret session where it's silent. They're in St. Peter's, and nobody is let in. The security is very tight, and so we don't know exactly what happens in there, except that they pray and take votes until they have a two-thirds majority. But something really interesting happened. Apparently, Bergoglio, now Pope Francis, had given quite a powerful speech in that general congregation. And some people said, can we publish that? And it came out, and in it he talks about a church that needs to go out from itself, a church that's become too referential and almost sick that way. And he says there are two images of the church, one that comes out of itself and one that lives of herself and for herself and in herself, and that we need a pope who will open this up. And you can't help but think that they heard this man say this and said, he's got to be pope, because it didn't take long.
No, that's the other thing.
It didn't take long at all.
It didn't take long, which the politician in me thinks that means that an awful lot of it was set up before they ever went in.
Well, he was quite a contender the last time, apparently. And Ratzinger squeaked in by just 2/3. And if that hadn't happened, who knows? He might have been pope earlier. Although nobody was looking at him this time. Yeah. Isn't it funny?
Yeah, you were referring to the idea of a church that goes out into the world.
Yes.
And we were talking before the show started about that's a real departure from his two predecessors.
Yes, I mean, I think you have to go back to Vatican II, which was an embrace of modernity. It was an embrace of different cultures, of different religions, and the beginning of an attempt to sort of see the work of the Spirit in all of creation. But we live in a flawed and dark world, and I think throughout those two papacies, there developed a continuing trend towards a kind of defensiveness, in a sense that the church held the light, but the world was dark, and that kind of you gather in upon yourself. And I just feel like Francis is saying, no, we've got to open up. Yeah.
But how is this going to manifest itself? Let's talk about some of the difficult issues facing the church. Yeah. We talked about what a humble Pope Francis appears to be. In the face of a church that often is perceived as arrogant. I mean, John Paul went out into the world, but it was mostly to tell people they needed to start living a certain way versus embracing the spirit of what they were talking about. Is that arrogance something you think that can be tempered by the Pope's humility?
Oh, yes. And you have to remember that the curia, the cardinals, the bishops, the leaders in the church, they do take their clue from the Pope. And that little anecdote about they're all of a sudden starting to dress simply, I think is very telling. And so it will be curious to see whether that witness of Francis's, which I think it's by no way an accident that he is behaving this way. It is who he is, but I think he is determinedly carrying that simple and open and humble persona into the papacy in order to really set the tone. And there are so many areas in which he now has to start real reform. And one hopes that he has been signaling through these gestures, because of course, as Catholics, we love symbols and gestures, and we know they really mean something. I think he is setting the tone for then the real work that's going to get done in terms of reform.
We're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
Don't go away, and you stay with us. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to The Game. I'm Mark Simon. We're joined by Catherine Wolff, author, editor, Catholic activist. We're talking about the Catholic Church, a well-known institution.
Yeah.
We were talking about church arrogance and the concept of reform. And you seem optimistic that the church is about to enter a new chapter in terms of some of the issues that have been rocking it over the last 20 years or so.
Yes, yes. I think we have to be cautious, though, because depending on who you speak to, there are many groups that have very different agenda, sometimes opposing agenda. And so in terms of reform in particular areas, that's going to be slow. I mean, this guy is a doctrinal conservative. None of the cardinals who were available to be elected were progressives in any way. However, his approach is so strikingly different from what we've seen before. It signals an openness and a sense of getting out to where people really live that tells me that maybe our leaders are being told to listen to the faithful. And I think that really could be the rejuvenation of the church.
You mentioned off the air a comment by Archbishop
John Quinn, who was, he's emeritus. He was in San Francisco for kind of late 70s to mid 90s, eminent scholar, okay? And he gave a talk at Stanford a couple of weeks ago before Francis was elected. It was in the interim time. And he was saying what we've got to do, he said the centralization of power in the Vatican is disastrous. They are out of touch. It is not, you know, a multinational corporation that's ruled from the top, and the Pope does not have sole say on everything. He said there are two functions of the papacy. One is unity. You're the latter-day Peter. People look to you as the kind of holy man who embodies and expresses our unity. And the other is the administrative function, and he is arguing, Quinn, for going back to the old patriarchal structure where a lot of the administration, the kind of development of local liturgies, of language, of respect for culture, and including cultural practices and norms in the life of the church has to happen at a level that's local. And so he was arguing for, yes, keep the Pope as the symbol of unity, but decentralize. Have patriarchs. I'd like to have matriarchs myself, but he's still trying. The old model is a patriarch. And you hear of that in the Orthodox Church. They have patriarchs. And they have a lot of power at the local level. And that would be a way, I think, where you could get the people who are faithful Catholics, concerned Catholics, smart and engaged Catholics be able to have a voice. And really, I think that there could be a liveliness there that could really, really move the church forward and make it attractive in a way that it has not been lately. Even to those of us who are Catholics, we feel shut out often.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the church in Latin America, because this is obviously, in many ways, the foundation upon which I mean, if you interpret what happened, picking someone from Latin America, in many ways what that said to me is that's one of the foundations upon which they want to build the future of the church. They recognize that that's a growth opportunity, that that's where there are good numbers. They can spend their time in the old world, or they can go off to the new world and find new life for the church. Is Latin America one of those places where you think this is going to happen?
Gotta be. What's happening in Latin America is that the Protestant evangelical churches have come in and they knock on people's doors and they go right into their lives and they're very inviting and they have incredibly lively liturgies, and there is a really significant exodus from the Catholic Church into the Protestant evangelical.
Is the idea that they're more directly engaged in the everyday lives of the people?
They go out and find people.
Yeah.
But you see, Francis does that too, you know, and he was known, he's a slum priest. He's the guy who goes out into the and he holds masses in the streets. Yeah. He lately scolded in very, very harsh terms priests in his diocese who were not baptizing the children of unwed mothers. And that was absolutely forgiven. He was horrified at that. So he's very in touch with human reality. Well,
and that leads to the sort of the church in the United States, which is that sense that, I mean, there's certainly a faction that thinks it's not as conservative as it should be. They miss Latin in Mass and the days when the priest didn't face the congregation. Yeah. But there's a question of its relevance to the everyday lives of people in this country, especially given some of the social changes that are taking place. So what does he say to the church in the USA?
Well, I think to think of it two ways. There's the church that says we hold on, there's so much cultural change that's going on that we have to hold on to something and weather the storm, and even if we're just a remnant going through the storm, at least the institution will survive, okay? And then another, probably larger group, more progressive group, will say, the church lives in the people. The people are faced with challenges where they need the guidance of the gospel and of the church, and that's not happening. Don't pull away from us. Join with us in meeting those challenges. And it's been, it remains to be seen how our bishops respond.
But what happens if this doesn't work? Is the Catholic Church in trouble in the United States?
Well, you know what I think I already see, actually, is that people understand that to be a Catholic, we're part of a great tradition and we honor the sacraments. But there are really very many ways in which we can live honorable lives, some of which may look not so honorable or legitimate to some other Catholics. We've got to find a way to really understand the church as a big tent, and that we come together to worship, and that we honor the sacraments, and we see the Spirit at work in our lives. And it may be at work very differently in your life in a way I don't understand. But there should be a sense that I don't reject you for that.
But that doesn't run the risk of some people not really being Catholics except maybe in name only?
I think that there are certain tenets of the faith that are bedrock. I mean, if you don't believe in the resurrection, or you don't believe in the real presence of the Eucharist, you don't believe in the Trinity, that's fine. But you're really doctrinally not a Catholic. But if you tell me no way can women even be deacons, you're not a Catholic if you think you can, then that's silly. I can argue anybody into the ground with that, you see. But there also ought to be that sense of tolerance, because we are unified. We are unified in those basic doctrines, and we are unified in our concern for the poor. Whatever you do to the least of my brethren, you do to me. That's Matthew 25, and that's bedrock. And that's, I think, why this Pope is just zeroing in on that, because nobody can argue with that.
Yeah. Well, that was the issue. Some people were uncomfortable when he did the washing of the feet, that they weren't all Catholics, they weren't all Christians.
That's right, and they weren't all men.
Yeah.
And I think I was telling you, I go to Holy Thursday every year, and all my parishes have always had little kids and old guys and men and women, because it's been a gathering of the community. In more conservative quarters now, they're trying to emphasize that as a sort of institution of the priesthood, so it has to be all men. But the Pope washed the feet of Muslim girls.
We'll take a quick break. Don't go away. And you stay with us. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. We're talking about the Catholic Church with Catherine Wolff, our resident expert on all things Catholic. We talked before, I made a reference to the difficult issues. As you know, we have a long list of them.
We do.
The first one is the corruption, the idea that the church is financially not as honest as it should be. Right. It's not spending its money to good services, to good works. It's spending it, in some cases, to make other people rich or to take care of friends with contracts. Yeah. Is that something you see this Pope taking on?
Oh, I think that was his charge. Mm-hmm. I really do. And when you look at what he did when he was in Buenos Aires, it's a very clear template that I hope he imposes on the Vatican. For one thing, as soon as he became Archbishop in Buenos Aires, they owned some banks, sold it, put all their accounts in private banks, just like private clients. Didn't want to have anything to do with the business with that. So some people say he may abolish the Vatican Bank. Wow. Another agenda that his old friends in Argentina see that he may press is making sure that all the departments in the Curia, that kind of central administration, are much more responsive to the people out in the world. You hear horror stories of bishops who've tried to get rid of offending priests, and it's taken 10 years to get an answer. Another thing would be to continue the efforts towards transparency that Benedict began. And then another one really is to fight this clericalism and the corruption that seems to have become embedded in that place. And it's all kind of murky.
What do you mean by clericalism?
A sense that if you are ordained, that, well, they do say they are ontologically different from you and me, that they are of a different order.
There's a sense of entitlement?
Well, certainly that goes along, that they are above and perhaps even exempt from certain of the obligations that the rest of us are, and that really their loyalty to that clerical culture kind of trumps all kinds of other loyalties, which I think was really part of the problem with the cover-up of the priestly clergy abuse, that it was more important to protect the church than to protect the children.
Yeah, let's talk about the abuse scandals, because that has always struck me as more than the financial issues, because everybody has always sort of accepted that the church has vast wealth that it guards very zealously, but the idea that this is a place where people are supposed to be protecting young people, they're supposed to be nurturing young people, and instead they're abusing them, and they're covering up for them.
Yeah.
I always thought was something that could potentially be very devastating to the church.
Potentially. Yeah. It has been devastating to the church, yes. Yeah. And I think that at this point there have been honorable and effective measures, at least in our country, other parts of the world, for instance, South America, they're lagging behind a little bit, but to put in safeguards. And I think people really understand that priests are human. There's going to be a certain amount of people in any group who have these proclivities and tragically, enact them. What people don't understand, and it seems to fall on deaf ears, and this problem is not going to go away until this is addressed, is that no bishop at all has ever been censured for covering this up. And we don't understand that.
Well, because it's so contrary to what the church is supposed to be.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
It certainly is. And you try to figure it out. They do take vows of loyalty. There have been directives over the years that these matters are to be kept, that are to be dealt with in church courts. But the fact of the matter is, their church exists in countries where we have laws to protect children that are better, apparently, than what they do within the church.
Do you see this Pope pursuing this issue?
He has to. Yeah. He has to. And he did recently stress with the man who is in charge of this that all protective measures are going to be carried out, and that the bishops' conferences have to carry this out in the field because it is so important to the witness of the church and its credibility. Those are the words of the Pope. So that's pretty strong. We'll see. I hope they can carry it out.
We're running short of time, so I'm going to ask you really complicated issues and ask you to give us really short answers.
Okay.
Do you see anything happening on priestly celibacy?
Possibly. You know, that's something that for the first 1,000 years or so of the church, male priests were married. And for a variety of reasons, mainly financial reasons and inheritance reasons, celibacy was imposed, I think in the 1100s. And so that is not something that is bedrock doctrine. That could be changed. And certainly in the Eastern rites, there are married priests.
Women priests.
Women priests, that's going to be a trickier one because of the apostolic succession that is claimed that comes from those who were designated as the 12 apostles. They were all males. You think about Mary Magdalene, she was in there too, but for some reason she was not designated. Now, for the first 1,000 years of the church, there were women deacons. So there's no reason that we could not go back, and there's significant scholarship on this right now, go back to that and formulate a role in the church for women where they could be deacons, they could marry people, they could baptize people, they could anoint the sick.
We've run out of time. We haven't run out of issues. We'll have you back again to talk about some of the other things that are facing the Catholic Church. Kathryn Wolff, thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for joining us. See us next time on The Game.